Chapter 22. Faster than expected. The reply came back in 11 days, which Halden told him was for capital correspondence routed through 3 separate guild offices. Close to a miracle. It wasn't from his parents. Kael had braced himself for that possibility without ever quite admitting he was doing it. And the letter? Careful, warm, clearly written by someone who'd rewritten it as many times as he'd rewritten his own. Explained why in the second paragraph, plainly, without softening it into something easier to hear. His mother and father had died the same season he'd disappeared in the same rift event, and the 15-year search had been carried since by his mother's older sister, a woman named Corvina Solari, who signed the letter herself. "I am not asking you to come to us," she'd written. "I am asking permission to come to you, if you'll have me. Because after 15 years, I find I don't trust letters to say the things I actually need to say." Kael read it 3 times at the chapel kitchen table. Father Bastien quietly making tea he didn't drink. Ren uncharacteristically silent beside him. "She's coming here," he said, finally, testing the shape of it. "If you say yes, I don't know how to say no to that." "You don't have to," Father Bastien said, setting the tea down anyway. "You just have to be honest with her about what you can offer when she arrives. She's had 15 years to imagine this moment. You've had 11 days. Nobody expects you to have caught up." The guild alert came 2 days later, cutting through whatever careful emotional processing Kael had planned to do with that advice. 3 short horn blasts from the outpost, the signal Ashenreach used for a full mobilization rather than a single rift. Multiple simultaneous rift signatures detected. Western District. First ring boundary, Ashen reported, its tone sharpening into something Kael had only heard once before, in the moment before the Duskhound Alpha charged. "This is not a normal pattern. Rifts do not typically cluster." Denner met him at the outpost gate already half into his field gear, face grim in a way Kael hadn't seen since the day Joran's report on the Long Watcher had come back marked severe. 7 signatures in the last hour. All west. All close to the outlying farms. Joran's patrol is out there. Bryce's patrol is out there. He looked at Kael, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no careful diplomatic hedge in his voice at all. "Halden's authorizing every combat-capable awakener in town. Kael. Official rank or not. I need to know if that includes you." Kael thought about Corvina Solari's letter, still folded in his coat pocket, and about a 15-year search that had finally found its answer, and about how easily an afternoon like that could end with a different kind of letter altogether if he hesitated now. "It includes me," he said, and started running. Chapter 23. The long silence breaks. Fen was already at the scrapyard gate when Kael got there, arms full of every piece of prepped deep scrap he had on hand. And for once he didn't waste time on grunted half-sentences. 7 rifts in one afternoon hasn't happened in this district in my lifetime," he said, shoving the supplies into Kael's satchel himself. "Not since." He stopped, jaw tight, and Kael understood, without needing it spelled out, exactly which since he meant. "Since 15 years ago. Guild's got a theory for clustered rift events. Something about pressure building behind a place that's already scarred thin. Sealed rifts leave a kind of residue, and enough residue in one spot eventually finds a new way through." Fen looked toward the black smudge of the deep on the horizon, closer and darker somehow than Kael had ever seen it look. "Nobody knows what's actually causing it, but if the Guild's oldest theory has any truth to it, this district's had 15 years of scars quietly stacking up under the surface. Today's the day some of them tore loose. Operator, I would add 1 data point, unprompted, because I believe the timing may matter," Ashen said quietly, as Kael shouldered the satchel and started for the western road at a dead run. "This event began roughly 15 days after your reply letter departed for the capital. I do not know if that is causation, coincidence, or simply my own pattern matching overreaching. but I would ask you to hold the possibility in mind. That's not exactly comforting timing to bring up right now. Agreed. I judged you would rather know than not. Holden had a field command post assembled at the edge of Miller's Field by the time Kael arrived, breathless. Seraphine and Tamsin already there ahead of him, both grim-faced and geared for combat. 7 confirmed breach points, Holden said, without preamble, sketching a rough map in the dirt with a stick. 4 already sealed on their own, beasts cleared by local patrols, 3 still active, including this one. She jabbed the stick at a mark near the western farmland, which is where Joran's patrol was stationed. We lost contact with them 40 minutes ago. Kael's stomach dropped. Bryce, 2 other E-ranks, and Joran, Holden confirmed. I'm sending the strongest response team we've got to that breach point. And Rennick, I'm not going to pretend your Aether reserve and your rank make you the obvious first choice. But Tamsin tells me what you built in that stream bed against the Long Watcher wasn't luck. And right now, I need every advantage I can field. She looked at him hard. Are you steady enough to run point on construct support? Or do I need you somewhere safer? Kael thought about Bryce. Insufferable. Small-minded. 40 minutes out of contact somewhere west, with beasts pouring through a breach that had already outpaced 1 hunter patrol. And found, to his own genuine surprise, that the anger he'd carried around for months had gone very quiet in the face of something more urgent. I'm steady, he said. Let's go get them. Chapter 24. Assignment. They found the breach point by the smoke first. A burning fence line. One of the outlying farmhouses evacuated in a hurry. Grain stores trampled flat by something considerably larger than a duskhound. The rift itself had already sealed, the way most of them did within the hour. But what had come through it clearly hadn't gone anywhere. Sandjaw pack, Tamsin called, scanning the trampled field. Big one, numbers in the double digits. Easy, which doesn't happen naturally. Something's hurting them, or something scared them all the same direction at once. There, Seraphine said sharply, pointing toward a collapsed grain silo half a field away, where 3 figures were visible through the drifting smoke, backs against the ruined stone, spears leveled at a widening circle of low, snapping shapes closing in from every side. Joran was down. Not dead, Kael could see even from this distance, but favoring a leg badly, blood soaking through a hastily wrapped bandage. Brias and the other 2 E-ranks were holding the line in front of him, and holding it badly. Exhaustion and fear written into every overextended thrust of their spears. Too many for a direct charge, Holden said, already calculating. If we come in loud, we split their attention, but there's a real chance some of that pack peels off and reaches the farmhouse instead. And there's still people inside. She looked at Kael. This is exactly the kind of problem you told me your class was built for. Prove it. Operator, this is the moment. Multiple simultaneous points of control. Precise timing. More than any single construct could manage alone. This is what the drone's sovereign path exists for. Kael dropped to one knee at the field's edge, both palms flat against packed earth, still warm from the fire, and reached for the thread of ether in his chest, deeper now than it had ever gone. 3 months of drills and 2 core absorptions humming behind the effort, and instead of 1 construct, or a dozen crude ones thrown out in desperation, he built something he'd only managed in practice until now. A dispersed swarm, a dozen small shapes rising from the churned dirt at once, each one distinct, each one still, impossibly, listening to the exact same mind. Go, he said, out loud, mostly for his own nerves. Split them. Draw the pack away from the farmhouse, toward the open field. Now, the swarm scattered, not chaotically, but in a coordinated wedge. Small, fast shapes darting between the Sandjaw's legs, snapping at ankles, drawing snarling attention away from the silo, one beast at a time, herding without ever fully engaging. It wasn't perfect. 3 of the 12 fell in the first 10 seconds, snapped up by beasts too fast and too frustrated to be easily fooled. But it worked. The pack's attention fractured, thinned, turned outward toward a dozen small threats instead of 3 exhausted teenagers and a wounded hunter. And into that fracture, Halden, Tamsin, and Seraphine moved as one. Now would be a good time to actually help them, Tamsin shouted back at him, already loosing arrows into the confusion. And Kael, breathless, aether draining fast, pushed everything he had left into the fight. Chapter 25. What the Swarm Can Do. The next 2 minutes were, Kael would decide afterward, the longest of his entire life. Longer even than the stream bed. Longer than the Duskhound Alpha's charge. Because this time, there wasn't just his own life on the line. And the math kept threatening to slip out of his hands entirely. He held the swarm's attention split 3 ways at once. One cluster harrying the pack's flank, thinning its numbers as Halden and Tamsin worked in from the open field. A second cluster wedging itself bodily into the gap between the silo and the nearest sandjaws, buying Bryce's group room to fall back. And a third, smaller cluster he sent racing ahead toward the farmhouse itself, just in case anything had slipped past the main pack unnoticed, Aether Reserve at 18%. This is beyond anything we have safely tested. I would recommend disengagement. Except disengagement currently means losing the farmhouse perimeter. Not an option. I'm aware. I am simply ensuring you are aware of the cost before you pay it. Bryce saw him first. Kael, kneeling at the field's edge, both hands buried in dirt, a dozen small violent shapes moving in perfect coordination around him, like he was conducting something instead of building it. And for one strange suspended second, even in the middle of a fight for his life, Bryce's face did something Kael had genuinely never seen it do before. Not fear, exactly. Recognition, maybe. Of a kind neither of them had words for yet. "Rennick," he shouted, disbelieving, dragging Joran backward as the silo's shadow gave them cover. Those are yours. Focus on running," Kael shouted back, and meant it as a joke, and did not have the spare breath to make it sound like one. The pack broke fully 30 seconds later. Not destroyed. Most of the surviving sandjaws scattering for the tree line the moment Halden put down their apparent leader with a single brutal strike, but broken enough that the field went, all at once, from chaos to ragged, gasping silence. Kael's swarm, what was left of it, drooped and stilled around him like puppets, with the strings finally cut, and he felt his own strength go with them, black spots crowding fast at the edges of his vision. The last thing he registered clearly was Bryce's voice. Closer now. Rough with something that wasn't its usual sneer at all. Hey, don't you dare pass out before I say something. I've been trying to work up to this for a week." Kael passed out before he said it. System notification. Combat contribution confirmed. Coordinated multi-construct engagement. Full success. Significant experience gained. Drone sovereign. Tier 1, Tier 2, class rank reassessed. Machinist, C rank, B rank. This is the largest single rank jump on record for your class. Please rest. This is not a request. Chapter 26. An apology. Badly delivered. He woke up in the outpost infirmary for the second time in 2 months, which Wren pointed out, immediately and at length, was becoming genuinely a pattern. Kael, we need to talk about your relationship with consciousness. Bryce was sitting in the corner of the room when Kael's eyes finally focused, arms crossed, visibly uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with his own minor injuries. And it took him a solid minute of Kael just blinking at him before he managed to actually start talking. "So," Bryce said, "I've been sitting here for like 2 hours trying to figure out what to say, and I still don't have it. So I'm just going to say a bad version of it, and you're going to have to accept that this is the best I've got, okay?" I was a real piece of work to you. For years. And I told myself it was because you were weird and weak and it didn't matter. And then you awoke the worst class in town, and I decided that proved I'd been right the whole time. And then you, he gestured vaguely at all of it. The infirmary, the memory of a dozen small violent shapes tearing a sandjaw pack apart around him. The general concept of Kael Rennick turning out to be much more than anyone in Ashenreach had ever given him credit for. You saved my life, and Joran's, and I don't actually know how to be a person who was wrong for that long without it feeling like I'm about to throw up, so I'm sorry. That's it. That's the whole thing. That was a genuinely terrible apology, Kael said. I told you it would be. It was also probably the most honest thing you've ever said to me. Bryce studied him for a moment, something uncertain and young in his face that Kael hadn't seen since they were both much smaller and far less complicated. We don't have to be friends, he said. I get that. I wouldn't be either if I were you. No, Kael agreed. But we don't have to be enemies anymore either. That's a start. Bryce nodded, once, sharply, like a man closing a ledger he'd been avoiding for years, and left without saying anything else, which Kael suspected was, for Bryce, its own kind of relief. Holden confirmed the rank change 3 days later. Once Kael was steady enough to stand through the reading without swaying. Mahajinst, B rank, logged. Guild witnessed, the largest single jump the talent division's records had for his class, which, given the class barely existed on paper, was a fairly low bar to clear. A fact Ashen pointed out, with what Kael was fairly sure was actual dry amusement. Capital's going to move fast now, Holden warned him, not unkindly. B rank, unclassified anomaly with confirmed multi-target tactical combat on top of a 15-year missing persons resolution. That's not a file that sits on anyone's desk for long. Kael thought about Corvina Solari's letter, still folded and refolded soft at the edges in his coat pocket, and about the aunt who'd asked permission to come to him instead of the other way around, and felt, for the first time, something that wasn't quite dread. Good, he said. I think I'm ready. Ren, overhearing from the doorway, snorted. You are not ready. Nobody's ever ready for family. But I suppose you might as well find out the hard way. Same as the rest of us. Somewhere on the workbench, back at the scrapyard, Scuttle the 27th sat patiently waiting for him to come home. Chapter 27.
The Envoy.
Corvina Solari arrived 12 days later in a plain traveling carriage with no house crest visible anywhere on it, which Kael noticed immediately and understood, without needing it explained, was a deliberate choice. A woman who had learned, somewhere along a 15-year search, not to announce herself before she knew what she was walking into. She was older than he'd pictured, silver threaded through dark hair pulled back plainly, dressed for travel rather than court, and the moment she stepped down from the carriage into the chapel courtyard and actually saw him, really saw him, not the idea of him she must have carried for a decade and a half, but the actual boy standing in front of her, something in her carefully composed face simply came apart. You have her eyes, she said, before anything else, before hello, before any of the careful things she'd surely rehearsed on the long ride out. My sister's eyes. I'd know them anywhere. I've spent 15 years imagining I might. Kael didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing at all. And Corvina Solari, apparently understanding exactly how much that silence cost him, didn't push. They talked for hours that evening, in the chapel's small side room, with Father Bastian hovering nearby in case either of them needed rescuing from the conversation, and Ren stationed just outside the door, pretending not to listen. Corvina told him what she knew, plainly, without softening it. His parents, her sister Elena and her sister's husband, Corwin, had been part of a small research expedition studying rift residue patterns near the Deep's Edge, the same season Kael was born, a catastrophic rift event, larger and stranger than anything the Guild's records from that period fully explained. had torn open close to their camp. His parents hadn't survived it. Infant Kael had simply vanished in the chaos, and every search in the following weeks had turned up nothing. No body, no trace, nothing at all, until a chapel 2 valleys over quietly took in a foundling boy roughly the right age and never thought to connect the two. "I don't know how you ended up here instead of dead in that crater," Corvina admitted. "I've had experts theorize about it for years. Displacement, some kind of rift-adjacent preservation. Nothing anyone's ever fully proven. I stopped needing the mechanism to matter around year 6. I just needed you to be alive somewhere. And it turns out I was right. And it turns out somewhere was a town 2 hours from where I was already looking. And I have no idea how to forgive myself for not finding you sooner." "You didn't do anything wrong," Kael said, quietly. "And meant it. I had a good life here. Not an easy one, but a good one." "I'd like to hear about it," Corvina said. "All of it, if you're willing to tell me." "I don't need you to be my nephew tonight, Kael. I'd just like to know you." "Operator," Ashen said softly. Once the conversation had wound down, and Corvina had retired to the small guest room Sister Marin insisted on preparing, despite her offer to stay at the outpost instead. "For what it is worth, my assessment of this individual is exceptionally favorable. I do not say that lightly." "Yeah," Kael said, staring at the ceiling of his own small room, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with Aether. "Yeah, I think I agree." Chapter 28. What was lost? Corvina stayed a full week, longer than she'd originally planned, and Kael watched her slowly, visibly relax with every extra day. The careful court posture loosening, the rehearsed sentences giving way to real ones, until by the 5th day she was arguing with Ren about the correct way to properly critique someone's terrible taste in construct names with the easy familiarity of 2 people who decided they liked each other. "Scuttle," Corvina repeated, on that 5th evening, watching the current one skitter across the scrapyard floor with open, delighted disbelief. "You've named 27 separate constructs Scuttle." 28, Kael said. "I built one this morning. That is the single most Solari thing I've ever heard. And I include in that assessment your great-grandfather, who named all 4 of his hunting dogs Dog. That's not comforting. It's genetic, apparently. I'm so sorry." But she was smiling when she said it, and Kael found himself smiling back. Something loosening in his own chest that he hadn't realized had been braced tight for weeks. The harder conversation came on the last night, after supper, when Corvina finally asked the question she'd clearly been holding since she arrived. "I have to go back to the capital eventually," she said. "There are people there, guild officials, house business, people who've known about this search for 15 years and will want to see, with their own eyes, that it actually ended. I won't pretend that's a simple thing to ask you to walk into, but I'd like you to come. When you're ready. Not before." Kael thought about it carefully, the way he thought about worn gear teeth, looking for the shape of the honest answer underneath the easy one. "I want to meet them," he said finally, "eventually. I want to know more about my parents, about House Solari, about all of it. But Ashenreach is where I actually grew up. Ren, Fen, Father Bastion, Sister Marin. They're not a placeholder for a family I hadn't met yet. They're just my family, and I'm not ready to leave here. Not with everything happening in the deep. Not with the guild finally taking my class seriously for the first time." He looked at her, hoping she'd understand it the way he meant it. Not as rejection. "Can it be both? Can I have both?" Corvina's eyes went bright, and she didn't try to hide it. "Kael, that's the only answer I would have believed, if you'd given me any other one." She reached out, hesitant, and when he didn't pull back, rested a hand briefly on his shoulder. The first time, he realized, either of them had actually touched. "Take whatever time you need. I've waited 15 years. I can wait a little longer for you to be ready on your own terms." She left 3 days later, promising letters, promising patience, promising. Ren made her swear to this one specifically, arms crossed, entirely serious, that she would absolutely not try to whisk Kael off to the capital the moment his back was turned. The scrapyard felt strange and quiet after the carriage disappeared down the eastern road. The particular hollow quiet of a house after guests have finally gone. And Kael sat at the workbench for a long time afterward, turning a half-finished construct over in his hands without really seeing it. "Big week," he said, finally, to no one in particular. An understatement, operator, but an accurate one. Chapter 29. Fragments. Things quieted down, in the strange, uneven way Ashenreach always did after a crisis. The burned fence line got rebuilt. The Sandjaw Pack's survivors retreated deep enough into the first ring that patrols stopped reporting sightings, and the town, with the particular resilience of small places that had survived worse, mostly went back to its ordinary rhythms within a couple of weeks. Kael did not entirely go back to his. Something had shifted, quietly, permanently, in the wake of the farmhouse fight and Corvina's visit both. And he found himself, more evenings than not, sitting at the scrapyard workbench turning the same unanswered question over instead of practicing drills. "Ashen, that night you promised you'd tell me eventually about the warlord fragment. What did you mean? You know what it says." And says. There was a long pause, longer than Ashen's usual clip delivery. Long enough that Kael wondered if the question had simply gone unanswered. "I did not lie to you. I do believe I know, now, what the fragment resolves to. I have chosen not to say it, not because the word itself would harm you, but because I have watched, across whatever fragmented memory I retain of my own long dormancy, what happens to operators who learn their eventual title too early. It becomes a destination instead of a consequence. They start building toward the word instead of toward the person the word is supposed to describe." Another pause. "You are, currently, becoming someone very good, operator. I would rather you keep becoming that, unhurried, than start performing a title you have not yet earned. That's a very long way of saying you're still not going to tell me." "Correct. I apologize for the length." Kael laughed despite himself, and let it go, mostly because he trusted Ashen's judgment more than he trusted his own curiosity at this point. 3 months and 2 rank-ups deep into a relationship with a machine intelligence he'd once been fairly sure was a hallucination. "Can you at least tell me something about yourself? Who built you? Why your own memory's corrupted? You know almost everything about me now. I don't know anything about you." Ashen was quiet again, and when it spoke this time, something in its usual clinical precision had softened, just slightly, into something closer to reflection. "I do not fully know who built me. My own earliest coherent memory is of dormancy, waiting, in the dark, for a very long time, for a signal I had stopped expecting to arrive. Before that, fragments only. A workshop, voices I cannot reconstruct with confidence. A designation I have genuinely lost. Not through damage, but, I believe, because someone deliberately stripped it before I was left wherever Fen eventually found me." A pause. "I do not know if that was done to protect me, or to protect whoever built me, or both. I have had a very long time to wonder, operator, and I have not yet arrived at an answer I trust." "That's—" Kael sat with that for a moment, something unexpectedly heavy settling into his chest on Ashen's behalf. "That's genuinely sad, Ashen, is it? I had not considered the framing. I am generally more comfortable with data than with feelings, as you may have noticed." "I've noticed. Then perhaps you can help me practice." Seraphine found him there, an hour later, still sitting at the workbench, and read his face with the particular ease of someone who'd spent enough evenings in this scrapyard now to know the difference between his ordinary quiet and this deeper, more distracted kind. "You look like you've been having a conversation with yourself," she said, settling onto the crate across from him without waiting for an invitation, which she'd stopped bothering to wait for weeks ago. "With Ashen." "About Ashen, actually. Turns out even ancient machine intelligences have complicated family histories. Runs in the company you keep, apparently." She said it lightly, but there was real warmth underneath it. The easy warmth of someone who decided, months ago, that this scrapyard and the people in it were worth her time. "For what it's worth," she added. "Whatever the word eventually turns out to be. I don't think it'll surprise me nearly as much as it seems to worry you. That's either very reassuring or very ominous. With me, it's usually both," Seraphine said, and didn't elaborate. And Kael found, watching her in the low evening light of the scrapyard, that he didn't especially mind not knowing yet. Chapter 30. What comes next? Halden found him at the scrapyard 3 days later, and Kael knew from her face, before she said a word, that whatever she was carrying wasn't the kind of news that waited politely for a good moment. "Capitol's issued a formal summons," she said, without preamble, holding out a sealed envelope much more official-looking than anything House Solari had sent. "Not a request this time. Guild Talent Division wants you at the Capitol for a full classification hearing, 3 senior adjudicators, a proper resonance panel, the works, B-rank unclassified anomaly with confirmed multi-target combat capability, and a resolved 15-year missing persons case isn't something they can keep filing under pending forever, Rennick. Someone above my rank has decided it's time." Kael turned the envelope over in his hands, feeling the wax seal, the weight of capital officialdom pressed into something as ordinary as paper. "When?" "You've got a month," which is, frankly, more courtesy than the Guild usually extends anyone. "And I suspect it's Corvina Solari's doing more than mine." Holden's expression softened, just slightly. "For what it's worth, you don't have to face this like it's a punishment. Proper classification means proper resources, training access most awakeners never see, a shot at understanding what your class actually is, from people who've spent their whole careers studying exactly this kind of question." She paused. "It also means the Capitol, and everything that comes with it. I won't pretend that part's simple." Kael thought about Corvina's letter, folded soft in his coat pocket. About Ren, who was going to have opinions about this that would take her at least an hour to fully articulate. About Fen, and Father Bastian, and a scrapyard full of badly named machines that had somehow become the most important classroom he'd ever had. About Seraphine, who'd told him the word wouldn't surprise her nearly as much as it seemed to worry him, and who he suspected already knew, without being told, exactly what this summons was going to mean for both of them. "A month," he said, mostly to himself, testing the shape of it the way he tested every hard problem, turning it over, looking for the mechanism underneath. "Okay. A month's enough time to get ready." "Ready for what, specifically, operator?" Kael looked out past the scrapyard gate, toward the dark tree line of the Ashwood Deep, quieter now than it had been in weeks, and felt something settle into place. Not certainty, exactly, but the particular calm of a decision finally made. "Everything," he said. "The Capitol. The hearing, whatever they end up calling me when this is all over." He picked up the half-finished construct from the workbench, turned it over once in his hands, and set it back down with something that felt, for the first time, less like hope and more like resolve. "I've got a month to get as strong as I possibly can. Might as well use it." Behind his ribs, quiet and patient as it had been since the night it first woke, Ashen said nothing at all. But Kael could have sworn, if a 200-year-old machine intelligence was capable of such a thing, that it was smiling. He didn't know yet what waited for him at the Capitol, or what the deep was still hiding past every ring anyone had ever mapped, or what word Ashen was still sitting on. He didn't know how Ren was going to take the news, though he had a fairly good guess it would involve at least one dramatic speech, and possibly a thrown apricot. But for one quiet evening, with a month ahead of him, and a workbench full of half-finished machines, none of that felt like something to dread. It felt, for the first time in a long while, like something to get started on. Kael picked up his tools and got started.